I could feel everybody watching us, wondering what was wrong with us, and whether it would kill us, and how heroic my mom must be, and everything else. That was the worst part about having cancer sometimes. The physical evidence of disease separates you from other people. We were irreconcilably others. And never was it more obvious than when the three of us walked through the empty plane, the stewardess nodding sympathetically and gesturing us toward our row in the distant back. I sat in the middle of our three-person row with Augustus in the window seat and Mom in the aisle. I felt a little hemmed in by Mom, so of course I scooted over towards Augustus. We were right behind the plane's wing. He opened up his bag and unwrapped his hamburger. The thing about eggs, though, he said, is that breakfastigation gives the scrambled egg a certain sacrality, right? You can get yourself some bacon or cheddar cheese anywhere, anytime, from tacos to breakfast sandwiches to grilled cheese. But scrambled eggs, they're important. Ludicrous, I said. The people were starting to file into the plane now. I didn't want to look at them. So I looked away, and to look away was to look at Augustus. I'm just saying, maybe scrambled eggs are ghettoized, but they're also special. They have a place and a time, like church dogs. You couldn't be more wrong, I said. You are buying into the cross-stitched sentiments of your parents' throw pillows. You're arguing that the fragile, rare thing is beautiful simply because it is fragile and rare. But that's a lie, and you know it. You're a hard person to comfort. Augustus said. Easy comfort isn't comforting, I said. You are a rare and fragile flower once, you remember. For a moment, he said nothing. You didn't know how to shut me up, Hazel Grace. It's my privilege and my responsibility, I answered. Before I broke eye contact with him, he said, Listen, sorry I avoided the gate area. The McDonald's line wasn't really that long. I just didn't want to sit there with all those people looking at us or whatever. At me, mostly. I said. You could glance at Gus and never know he'd been sick. But I carried my disease with me on the outside, which is part of why I'd become a homebody in the first place. Augustus Waters, notably charismatist, is embarrassed to sit next to a girl with an oxygen tank. Not embarrassed, he said. They just piss me off sometimes. And I don't want to be pissed off today. After a minute, he dug into his pocket and flipped open his pack of smokes. About 9 seconds later, a blonde stewardess rushed over to our row and said, Sir, you can't smoke on this plane, or any plane. I don't smoke, he explained, the cigarette dancing in his mouth as he spoke. But it's a metaphor, I explained. He puts the killing thing in his mouth, but doesn't give it the power to kill him. The stewardess was flummoxed for only a moment. Well, that metaphor is prohibited on today's flight, she said. Gus nodded and rejoined the cigarette to its pack. We finally taxied out to the runway and the pilot said, Flight attendants, prepare for departure. And then two tremendous jet engines roared to life and we began to accelerate. We began to accelerate. This is what it feels like to drive in a car with you, I said. And he smiled, but kept his jaw clenched tight and I said, Okay? We were picking up speed and suddenly Gus's hand grabbed the armrest, his eyes wide, and I put my hand on top of his and said, Okay? He didn't say anything, just stared at me wide-eyed and I said, Are you scared of flying? I'll tell you in a minute. He said. The nose of the plane rose up and we were aloft. Gus stared out the window. watching the planets shrink beneath us. And then I felt his hand relax beneath mine. He glanced at me and then back out the window. "We are flying," he announced. "You've never been on a plane before?" He shook his head. "Look," he half shouted, pointing at the window. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I see it. It looks like we're in an airplane." "Nothing has ever looked like that ever in all of human history," he said. His enthusiasm was adorable. I couldn't resist leaning over to kiss him on the cheek. "Just so you know, I'm right here," Mom said. "Sitting next to you, your mother, who held your hand as you took your first infantile steps." "It's friendly," I reminded her, turning to kiss her on the cheek. Didn't feel too friendly. Gus mumbled just loud enough for me to hear. When surprised and excited and innocent Gus emerged from grand gesture metaphorically inclined Augustus, I literally could not resist. It was a quick flight to Detroit, where the little electric car met us as we disembarked and drove us to the gate for Amsterdam. That plane had TVs in the back of each seat. And once we were above the clouds, Gus and I timed it so that we started watching the same romantic comedy at the same time on our respective screens. But even though we were perfectly synchronized in our pressing of the play button, his movie started a couple seconds before mine. So at every funny moment, it left just as I started to hear whatever the joke was.